So much talk about a potential second civil war, right? Seems like it's everywhere. Articles, discussions online, you name it. You've been sending us tons of stuff. Articles, opinions, even some pretty wild theories from the internet.
And honestly, that's why we're doing this deep dive, trying to make sense of it all. You've got data, arguments, fears, all this swirling around. We're aiming to sift through it all and pull out the important bits so you don't have to wade through all the noise, figure out the different viewpoints and all that.
Yeah, it's a lot. I bet the biggest question on everyone's mind is, well, is it actually happening? Are we headed for another civil war?
Yeah.
I mean, some sources dive right into that, like that Rasmussen poll we saw, the one from April. 4 out of 10 voters think it's likely within the next 5 years. Kind of makes you think, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. And here's the thing, right? It's not like the 1860s, that North versus South thing. Doesn't really apply anymore. The NPR article, the one you sent, it highlights this shift. It's more urban versus rural now. Or metro areas against non-metro. And what's really interesting is it's not even split cleanly by state. Like, you've got these divisions within states, makes things way more complicated geographically.
Way more complicated for sure. And then there's that Common Dreams article, the one that claims the second civil war is already happening, but not with guns and battles, at least not yet. They're talking about like the erosion of democracy and all the divisive rhetoric flying around. Like they specifically call out people like, was it Scott Perry and Stephen Miller? They're saying these guys are actively trying to undermine the system, especially after the 2020 election. So it's like a war on the processes themselves, not necessarily a physical one.
Exactly. So right off the bat, we've got three distinct ideas. One, there's a real chance of armed conflict based on what people are saying. Two, the geographic lines are blurred. And three, there's this argument that a different kind of civil war is already happening, but it's attacking the core of our system.
Okay, so let's dig into the arguments for a potential future war, the one with guns and fighting, using the Daily Press article. What do they say?
Well, they point to some big policy differences between red and blue states, like total opposites on stuff like abortion and gun control, those DEI programs in schools, even how we vote, like those election police they're setting up in places like Florida and Texas. It's like they're living on different planets, totally different values and priorities. And it's not just policies, right? It's where people are choosing to live to, that political segregation thing. Red counties are getting redder and blue counties are getting bluer. And get this, they talked about super landslide counties, the ones where a candidate gets like 80% of the vote. Only 6% of counties were like that in 2004. But in 2020, it jumped to 22%. That's a huge increase. Shows how people are clustering with their own kind, politically speaking.
Makes you wonder if people are actually seeking out places where everyone thinks the same way, like an echo chamber, but in real life. And the Daily Press even mentioned that some surveys show that Americans now really care about living near people who share their political views. But okay, here's what I found really scary. The article said that 42% of voters think the other party is, and I quote, downright evil. That's insane, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's intense. If you think almost half the country is evil, how can you even talk to them, let alone compromise? It's like that affective polarization thing where you just hate the other side so much, there's no way to find common ground. Okay, now let's look at a different take. The TPM article. They don't really think a traditional civil war is going to happen, and they agree with the NPR article about the lack of clear regional lines. But they do say something else.
Yeah, they don't rule out trouble completely. They use the phrase something more realistic and still ominous. And they even bring up that Tesla Cybertruck thing that exploded. They're suggesting it could be an example of political violence bubbling up. It's like they're more worried about scattered, smaller conflicts than a full-blown war.
Exactly. So even the folks who aren't predicting a huge war are still concerned about the potential for chaos and violence. Makes you think, what kind of conflict seems most likely based on what you're seeing out there? All right, let's dive into those Reddit threads and Be Today comments. It's a real mixed bag of anxieties, theories, you name it.
Well, yeah, it gets interesting there. I mean, sometimes scary interesting. Like on that Roth My Chest subreddit, there was this user, Chester Bays 87. They said societal collapse, like from a bad economy, could trigger a conflict. And Kitty Grew Amastache on Reddit, they said something similar. People with nothing to lose, that's when things get dangerous. And then there's Shop Sneaker Fire, really worried about white supremacists and neo-Nazis, basically saying, gotta fight back if those groups gain power.
Yeah, and it's wild how you have those views, then completely different takes right next to them. Like Carbonatite and Michael Penis Jr., they both said the same thing, basically. No way people are giving up their comfy lives for a war. We're too addicted to our stuff.
It's a good point, right? And then someone, Allosace, I think, said we might see something like the Troubles, that conflict in Ireland, like long-term localized violence, not a big war. Kind of lines up with what TPM said about something ominous,
But,
and not a full-blown civil war.
right, right. What's really fascinating, though, is how some people frame the whole conflict. Like on BU Today, Blake Hardigree said it's not even about parties or race anymore. It's U.S. versus them, the people against the government. Sounds like a deep distrust in the system, doesn't it?
Yeah, a whole different way of looking at it. And on that same site, you have so many different angles. Hunter said the left's gone crazy, like full Mao crazy, and they see it as individualism against authoritarianism.
Yeah.
But then red, white, and blue, they're worried about a liberal coup and uh, socialism in the NWO, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Talk about polarization, right? It's like everyone's living in their own reality.
Yeah, and we got to be careful with misinformation and all that, especially online. Like that Anna Marie comment on BU Today. They said most violence comes from the left, blaming Antifa and BLM. But then I called them out. Even linked to a CBS News article about the rise of white supremacist violence, though AS pointed out that doesn't necessarily mean they're the majority of violence, just that it's increasing. And you've got people pushing their own agenda, like Dave, who said white supremacists are actually leftists because of some weird socialism argument. And then Andrew, with that super long comment accusing Democrats of being the real racists and saying they're using things like welfare and abortion as modern-day slavery, which is just, wow.
And that's not even the half of it. Patrick Riot, they had this whole theory tying a civil war to the 17th Amendment and the Federal Reserve, something about a secret group trying to get rid of the Electoral College. I mean, where do they even come up with this stuff? And then you have Jason, worried about the media dividing everyone, but then admits they're buying extra ammo just in case. I mean, that sums up the anxiety, doesn't it?
For sure. And then Bridget just comes out and asks, why can't we split into two countries? Talk about a velvet divorce, right? And Tom Keating nailed it, I think, talking about how no one can have a civil discussion anymore. It's all you're with us or against us. Kind of hard to solve problems that way.
We even had someone from Australia chime in, Greg, I think. He's predicting a left versus right war here in 50 years. And then there was Brian Hamilton, a bit more hopeful. He said maybe all this division is being created on purpose, and he wants people to actually talk to those who disagree with them.
It's a whirlwind of thoughts out there, that's for sure. Back on Reddit, Deported Mexican of 5 said the whole situation feels intentional, like someone's pulling the strings. And Rappel brought up some interesting potential triggers for conflict that you might not think about, like parks closing, disease outbreaks, medicine shortages, like everyday stuff that could push people over the edge. And Virtual Adagio 4UA87 said a single message from Trump could spark violence. Kind of scary to think about the power of one person's words, right?
Yeah, and so many different ideas about what a conflict might look like. Boggy Creed 2 said a cold civil war has been going on since 2000, but it'd be in different places than the first one. And Day Jones 109 thinks it'll be governors or mayors defying the president, like a power struggle. Apprehensive Log 8333 even recommended this really dark podcast about a future civil war. I haven't listened to it yet. Kind of nervous too, honestly.
Yeah, I get that. And then you have infamous Addendum 175 saying the divides is rural versus urban now, so there wouldn't be clear battle lines, just fighting everywhere. And lazy background 2474 compared it to, like, the Balkans with states breaking up into chaos. Not a pretty picture.
And then, well, some stuff just gets a little too out there for Reddit. Like, Jazz Like Development 9, they actually said the Democrats are the Communist Party, and that it'll be a war between, like, Antifa and drag queens against Middle America patriots.
Years.
And then, otherwise, Flamingo 3 just wants to sit back and watch everyone destroy each other. Not exactly helpful.
No, not at all. And of course, you got your conspiracy theories. Other Boysenberry 521 had a whole thing about immigrants in UN uniforms and Democrats planning to depopulate the country. Called them supreme beings, no less. They said it's all part of Agenda 21 to create a socialist utopia. It's like a movie plot gone wrong.
I know, right? So much to think about. Okay, let's move on to some of the articles that try to offer solutions or at least make sense of it all. The Time article, that one was about ways to, like, overcome all this polarization, right?
Yeah, they had all these strategies. Stop to reset, spot positive deviance, complicate to simplify, and move to synchronize and adapt to setbacks.
Yeah.
What struck me was their focus on something called equal status contact. Basically, getting people from different sides to interact on an equal footing. They admit it's really hard with all the inequality we have, but their pilot program, the one with community activities, is kind of hopeful, you know? People connecting over shared experiences.
Sounds like a good idea, in theory. And then that NPR interview with Barbara Walter, the political scientist. Her take was pretty bleak. She said the U.S. is now a partial democracy. Like, we're in the same category as Ecuador, Somalia, Haiti. Not exactly great company, right?
Yeah.
And she blames it all on what's been happening since 2016, especially that urban-rural split.
Yeah, that's a wake-up call for sure. Makes you wonder how fragile our system really is when we're this divided. Now, the MIRA safety article, they made a direct comparison to the first Civil War. They said slavery and states' rights were the big issues back then, but today it's guns, healthcare, immigration, like totally different topics, but just as fundamental and divisive.
And they talked about the consequences, even if a full-blown war seems unlikely. Economic collapse, social breakdown, maybe even a dictator taking over. Scary stuff. It's kind of funny they even mentioned that Civil War movie that came out this year. Like, it's tapping into this fear that's already out there.
Art imitates life, maybe. Then there's the FPIF article. They went all in, saying that people like Trump, the way they talk and act, ignoring the rules of democracy, it's putting the country in serious danger. They basically said it's either a coup or a civil war, and they even mentioned Elon Musk and how much influence he has. Kind of makes you think about the role of like powerful people and social media and all this.
Yeah, that's a lot of power in the hands of a few. And the Guardian article, they said something similar. They actually think the next U.S. Civil War is already happening, but it's more like a slow motion collapse of the system. People don't trust the government. You have all these anti-government groups popping up, threats against politicians and election workers, even some cops siding with these anti-government patriots. Yeah. Not a good sign.
No, not at all. It's like the whole idea of a functioning society is breaking down. And then there's that NPR article again, the one about the Civil War movie. They said the real danger might be from these scattered extremist groups, like the ones we saw on January 6th. Even if they're a small minority, they can still cause a lot of damage, and they're hard to track because they're not organized in one big army.
So, after all this reading, it seems like we have a lot of different opinions, but a few things keep coming up. Some people think a second civil war is inevitable, maybe even happening already, while others think it's unlikely. But everyone seems to agree on a few things.
Yeah, like the polarization, the urban-rural divide, people losing faith in institutions, social media messing with our heads, and the very real possibility of violence, even if it's not a full-scale war.
So while a big organized war like the first one might not happen, there's still this sense of dread, like things are volatile and something bad could happen. You see it in the online comments, and even the experts are worried.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. So as you think about all this, the data, the fears, the different viewpoints, we want to leave you with a question. What does all this tell you about where America is headed? Keep learning, keep thinking critically, and keep talking about this stuff. It's important.